Welcome back. You're watching Treasury Online. I'm Antti Pekkala. So far today, we've talked about surprises, data, and visibility. Now we turn to a question that sounds simple but turns out to be surprisingly complex. What happens when cash just sits still? My guest is Dennis Kiratli, Treasury Transformation Lead within the Global Center of Excellence for Corporate Treasury Advisory at KPMG. It's a very long title, and as Dennis explained to me, it essentially means that if it involves treasury transformation, liquidity management, forecasting, working capital, or operating model redesign, it probably lands on his desk. And then he spends most of his time working inside large and mid-sized international corporates, redesigning cash management structures, in-house banks, payment factories, pooling setups, and forecasting models. Dennis, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Auntie. Thanks to everyone joining.
Okay, let's do some polls. What percentage of your total liquidity do you suspect is structurally idle? Is it under 5%? Is it 5 to 10%? 10 to 20? Or have you never quantified that? Dennis, so if I called idle cash as one of the most expensive risks in Treasury, would you agree?
I have two answers. One
Okay.
is short. Yes, I agree. And then here's a long answer, and I hope this is not consultancy fuck to you. It depends a bit, right? So maybe not in the traditional sense of risk. So when I hear risk, and I mean I'm a treasurer at heart, I think about FX volatility, counterparty risk, and refinancing risk. But then there's idle cash, and idle cash is different because it's a silent risk, right? It doesn't create any headlines, it doesn't create any triggers or alarms. It just quietly erodes value every single day, and in this context, I define this as an economic inefficiency, right? And it just compounds over time. Sorry for the consultancy, folks. So what I think is idle cash is just super dangerous because it exists, right? So and it means liquidity is not flowing to where it creates the most value, and that's where the economic inefficiency comes from. Whether that is debt reduction, investment, or buffer optimization, and what it basically means, it is not adding value. It's expensive. It costs the company cash, expensive cash, and that's why this idle cash is such a silent, dangerous risk in my eyes.
What are the first signals that tell you that idle cash is structural rather than accidental?
Uh, that's another consultancy approach, I'm afraid. So I would I would think of triggers, right, or signals, so to speak. So something measurable, especially when we discuss these things with the CFO and the Director of Treasury. So I would say the first signal, so to speak, is chronic excess balances in the same entity. So not just month-end spikes, right, but permanent comfort cushions. They just keep them there for virtually no reason. I mean, it's good to have that, but it should be centralized so to be allocated to a more efficient purpose. So that's one. Second, it's manual daily positioning rituals. So treasury teams pulling spreadsheets at 9 a.m., calling subsidiaries, reconciling yesterday's numbers when visibility depends on human effort. I think idle cash is rarely accidental, but more structural, right? So if you don't have a perfectly well outlined KPI report and a dashboard, and you have to call people to understand, I do believe that there's a leakage in value. And the third one that we usually look at is buffers that nobody remembers approving because they just build up over time, right? So why do we keep this 1 million buffer here? And then the answer is, well, we all have. I think that's a good sign
Okay.
for having idle cash. Yes.
How much value is typically trapped simply because decision cycles are too slow?
Well, I would say so. It's difficult to talk about value per se, right? From my perspective, what a huge problem is is that latency in cash visibility is a hidden tax on liquidity, right? So what this means is that every hour between cash arriving and treasury acting on on it is a lost optimization window because they could have optimized rather than finding out where the cash is. So if it takes 2 days to see consolidated global cash, that means 2 days where surplus cannot offset debt, cannot be reinvested, cannot reduce buffers elsewhere, or pay down on an overdraft facility. So individually, it sounds super small, but then systemically, think about you do this across 50 entities, 100 accounts, or even 200 accounts, it compounds very, very quickly. So the leakage does not per se come from dramatic mistakes or fat finger errors. It comes from slow systems, and this builds up over time. At what point this becomes systemically relevant in terms of value, I guess that depends on the company, really.
Okay, so let's take a 1 to 2 billion euros revenue company. What order of magnitude are we usually talking about? Is it tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or is it millions per year?
You want a number?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I would say realistically, really, realistically, millions. Okay.
Okay.
So let this resonate for you. Why? Not because not because there's one single mistake, right? Simply because the working capital, as it breathes for the companies, um, I think a lot of the times it's underestimated how much it breathes. So the saving potential is in the millions, um, but can you realize all of that? And to what extent do you have to go to realize it, right? Because surplus in one region cannot offset overdraft elsewhere. Maybe that's a structural problem, right? So buffers are sized independently. Reporting delays force conservative positioning, right? So these are the things that, and even a modest 5 to 10 million in unnecessary average idle balances multiplied by today's cost of capital, right? So we're not in a super low interest rate environment anymore. It quickly becomes a seven-figure annual effect, and this will definitely be visible in your financial disclosure. And and that's more mid-sized groups, right? So in larger multinationals, it's significantly higher. But I'm saying millions, and maybe people are sharpening their ears. Um, there is a bit of a journey to realize these savings, right? So to what extent are you willing to go to actually fix the problem? So there's a lot of project work, change management, and a lot of discussions here.
Perfect time for an audience poll, I'd say. When was your liquidity buffer last formally challenged or recalculated? Was it within the last 3 months? Within 12 months? Is it more than a year ago? Or is the question of it growing organically? How often is structural cash issues caused by Treasury waiting on information rather than the lack of liquidity?
Um, I mean, I would say rather often, right? So rather often than not, because in many organizations, the issue is not we do not have cash. I mentioned this in the beginning. It is we do not know with confidence where it is right now and where it will be in the next few hours or tomorrow. So it becomes a forecasting problem, right? So Treasury waits because if they don't have the right bank account statements in their Treasury management system, I believe that all they can do is send an email or call somebody. And every hour waiting leads to conservative positioning. And the irony is, many companies already have the liquidity they need to reduce debt or optimize structures. They just lack the speed and confidence to act upon. So it's all about decision making, right? It's all about transparency. And in the first instance, you don't need to have a super AI enabled, real time treasury to make those decisions. All you need is a treasury management system with the right KPIs, with the bank account statements and proper reporting. And that is where digitally you'll have the visibility, right, to make the right decisions. So including platforms such as Nementia, they become super powerful. And not just because they create cash, but because they reduce latency and enable decision making.
How would you go about distinguishing between prudent liquidity buffers and institutionalized overbuffering?
I mean, I think you're going into the change management area. So I think this is sensitive, right? So it's a sensitive topic across our projects because you start changing or trying to change people's behaviors and their rhythms and their patterns in their daily lives. So first of all, buffers are not wrong. In fact, buffers are responsible, and buffers are necessary. So the question is, are they analytical or emotional, right? So do you want this extra emotional layer of security? A prudent buffer, in my eyes, is explicitly calculated. So you have a basis, a very, very simple formula, right? So maybe you have to make rent, you add payroll. That's a good start, right? So is that a buffer I need? It should be linked to volatility, so your peaks, seasonal, whether from dividend perspective or you have particular out and inflows. It needs to rely on forecast accuracy. It needs to be aligned with your risk appetite, and really important, it needs to be reviewed regularly because so for example, when we finish our projects and there's KPIs and there's a buffer, what we oftentimes see, we come back after a year and we ask, have you reviewed? No, you calculated this a year ago, but it changes. On the other hand, overbuffering, from my perspective, there's also three features, so to speak. So it's round numbers, just because I think the mind likes 10 million, 5 million, 1 million, right? So it's easy to remember. There's no owner. Somebody is just trying to hit this 1 million mark because that's the buffer that they've always had. It hasn't been revisited in years, right? So when someone says we always keep 20 million buffers just in case, I believe that's a very, very strong sign that you should dive deeper there.
So, what governance failures, in your experience, typically allow buffers to grow without challenge?
So I want to be sensitive about this, right? So I don't want to accuse any of my prior clients being subject to governance failure systemically, but I do believe that there is governance failure. So I agree with you, Antti. I think that's right to say. Um, so first, firstly, I believe buffer ownership is unclear. I keep coming back to that. But who is managing this buffer? Why do you keep on a cash pool that is zero balanced managed? Why do you keep a buffer for particular reasons that you can explain? Right? So who's owning this? Is it the treasurer? Is it the local CFO? Is it the local finance director? Is it the local treasury team? So it's key, right? Ownership in many, many areas. So second, no KPI exists for buffer efficiency. I mean, we measure DSO as a general metric for days sales outstanding, and we measure net debt. For example, I'm just giving you two examples, but very rarely do organizations measure idle cash ratio or buffer drift over time, whatever you call it, right? So without visibility and ownership, buffers grow quietly, they just creep up, and then at some point you feel comfortable with them because you can just have them, and nobody's rewarded for reducing them. So there's no incentivation. But everyone is criticized if liquidity is ever tight. So I think it's an how do you call this? I think it's an asymmetrical problem, right? So you are basically incentivized to keep a really, really high buffer because then you're on the secure side. But the moment that you have a super, super tight buffer that takes a lot of time and emotional strength to manage it, and then one day you have a breach, I think that's the day that everyone will remember, right? So I think it's an asymmetrical incentivization.
In the best in class organizations you've seen, how is buffer sizing actually decided and reviewed?
So I believe in treasury centralization, hence my role as the transformation lead, where most of the times centralization is an outcome. Okay, so that is why I believe it should be defined centrally. Why? Because the treasurer, the treasury teams centrally, they have the oversight. They have access to the treasury management system. So they also have access to the forecast. So it should be based on their forecast, based on their forecast volatility, and they should have all the means to run stress scenarios, right? Also, ideally in their TMS, so they have all the information. Um, the review cycle is a bit of a, let's say, situation where you have to not exert over effort, right? So I don't think it means that you have to look at this monthly. Depends on your business model, right? So are you in staples? Probably biannual is fine. Are you in a super seasonal, cyclical, very unpredictable business model, and subject to many, many external drivers? It's probably good to do this on a quarterly basis, right? So, and it needs to be linked to actual performance. For example, if forecast accuracy improves, your buffers should decline. It's a very, very simple thing, right? So in good times, everything is fine. In bad times, maybe you increase. And what is a good time? What is a bad time? I don't know how to define this for every corporate. I think it's up to them. So, and another example would be if market volatility rises, buffers increase, right? So it's the same mechanism, just in the other direction. I believe that the key difference is that buffers are dynamic and they're not, incorporated in 1909 and they never change. So they should live. So I think that's really the most important takeaway here.
How often do organizations have the technology but fail to change the behaviors that actually create idle cash?
Unfortunately, more often than not. Um, so in our projects, we frequently see companies implement strong tools, right? It's all about the tooling, the technology, AI, and rollout plans, and all of these things, dashboards, and maybe the CFO likes to have this on his phone. Look at it, and automated bank connectivity, forecasted modules, but the daily rhythm of the people, it does not change. So I've seen this a lot of times after a TMS implementation, people still use their Excel sheets because they love them. They love them dearly. They feel secure because they built them, right? So they still reconcile manually. The decisions are still escalated slowly, and that's back to my point of being quick on your feet when it comes to having the right KPIs, escalating if you have a breach, for example. And as a result, buffers remain untouched, right? So technology without behavioral change, it just automates yesterday's, so to speak, inefficiency. And this is something, and it sounds really, really harsh. You have to break that up, right? You have to challenge the status quo. So, from my perspective, true transformation, it happens when decision rights, reporting cycles, and accountability, they shift, and not just with the introduction of the software. I think these are two distinct things.
Hey, let's do another poll here. How quickly can you redeploy excess liquidity once it's identified? Is it same day? Within 2 or 3 days? Within a week? Or is it a question of it depends? What would you say are the operational bottlenecks that most commonly prevent the full utilization of these technologies?
I think that's an easy one. Um, first, first, I would list, so fragmented banking landscape, or even fragmented bank connectivity. So you don't have the transparency. You don't get the bank account statements. Maybe you have a TMS here, a couple of local TMS here. Maybe something is being imported into the ERP, and then you have the e-banking portals, right? So if you cannot see global balances early in the day, you cannot act confidently and make decisions. Full stop. So the second one, it's basically the activity right after. I'm following a bit the day in the life of a cash manager. It's the manual reconciliation. If you take a long time, spending the morning validating numbers, you have to copy paste. Somehow you bring this out into your personal Excel sheet. You have a BI, and then you report this to the TMS. I think optimization is just doomed from the start, right? So that's basically maybe a theme, right? So lack of automation, even though you have the technology. And then lastly, I believe that if there is decentralized decision making, or it's not clear who owns this, keep coming back to that. So ownership is super important. So if local entities must approve every movement, so I think speed disappears. It's not about taking something away from them. It's just unburdening them from unnecessary decisions that they cannot make in the best perfect way because they don't have all the information. So I believe near, or I don't know what near or real time really means these days, right? So just fast. Positioning is not just about data; it's about removing friction from the decision chain, and that's how we make change.
What would you say is the opportunity cost of having treasury expert focus on these manual administration tasks instead of analytical decision support?
I mean, it's enormous. So a lot of the times when we support corporates in this area, half the time we need to prove the business case. Okay, half the time, literally. So the first project step is always give me the business case. So we do the full cycle analysis of the working capital. We look at idle cash balances. We look at the cash pooling structure and the end-to-end chain for how long it takes for forecasting. Is it being integrated with the controlling and FP&A guys, or are they doing their thing? Is Treasury directly forecasting their thing, and then they don't talk? So if you put all of this in there, I keep going back to this multi-million-dollar business case. Just recently, we've had an example where we rolled out a payment factory for a pharma company, and we only looked at the pilot countries in Europe and the US. And what the result was of the business case, and we're currently, implementing that, is just the pilot entities in Europe, in West Europe, like 5 countries, and the main entities in the US, because they would centralize payments, they were able to improve their DPO by about 7 base points. It doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking millions because this is a big pharma company. They have a huge spending cube. So just for the pilot, and we didn't even get started on the collection. So not that you influence customer payment behavior, but you actually increase automation on the reconciliation. So, for example, through the use of virtual accounts and collections on behalf of, you absolutely tweak that DSO metric, right? So much, much faster straight through processing from reconciliation. And here, and this hasn't been calculated to the last decimal, there was an estimate of 5 base points increase or improvement on the DSO. And this is huge. So if you bring this up to the net working capital number, we're talking millions. So
Indeed.
every hour spent again on manual administration, um, reducing buffers, optimizing intercompany funding, improving forecasting quality, supporting strategic decisions, and in mature setups, Treasury acts like a liquidity control tower. And this is what I want to finish this answer with. Treasury as the liquidity control tower has many ways to enable a much, much better cash strategy using payment on behalf of virtual accounts, forecasting, a TMS, centralized decision making. And from my perspective, that is what best practice looks like.
A quick poll for the audience. How much time does your treasury team spend on manual positioning versus decision making? Are you mostly analytical? Are you balanced? Are you mostly operational or manual? Or have you never even assessed this? Dennis, okay, what would you challenge our audience to measure differently starting next week?
So I'll try to summarize a bit because there was a lot talking. So what would I challenge the audience to take away from this, right?
Sure.
And what to do differently. So I would suggest start start measuring these two things, right? If you do this already, I'm happy to have a conversation what the outcome is. So first, do you know what your average idle balances are as a percentage of total liquidity? So idle balances over total liquidity. If that number surprises you, or if that number doesn't correspond to what you want it to be, I believe that you might want to be more proactive in that, right? Maybe do a review, maybe check whether something is specifically driving that. Maybe it's people, maybe it's the wrong KPIs, it's the wrong incentivization. Could be numerous things. So not just total cash, but really unnecessary cash. And secondly, how long does it take you to make a decision on a daily or weekly basis about your liquidity? How much to invest, how much to borrow overnight, or whether to say we're just fine? How long does it take you? So I think this KPI is decision latency. How many hours or days pass between cash visibility has been recorded to the action? If you believe that this is less than a day, I think you're really, really good. If this is multiple days, depending on your business model, depending on your strategy, I do believe that there's a way to optimize that. I'll stick with these two things, Andy.
Thank you, Dennis. That was a lot to take in. Fortunately, Nobody needs to take perfect notes in these sessions because everything is being recorded and can be revisited later. I know I will do that. But right now, because in just a couple of minutes, we are moving to something that ultimately determines whether any Treasury transformation initiative moves forward at all. Decision making at the top table. Why the CFO says no, and hopefully how to win them over. Joining me next is Rit Medlock, board chair of Mentia and a former CFO of 2 FTSE 100 companies. Wish me luck, and I'll see you there.